Lay? Thank you for teaching us.
Oh, yeah, just
And good morning, Katrina. Thank you for your translation. Welcome to anyone watching online. We'll begin with some prayers, and you'll find those in the chat, a link to those in the chat box. And we'll begin now.
To the teacher endowed, transcendent destroyer, one thus gone, full destroyer, completely and fully awakened one, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, the world supreme guide of beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and humans to you, the Buddha endowed, transcendent destroyer, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni, I prostrate, make offerings and go for refuge. Middle supreme among humans, you are born on this earth, you pay 7 strides and set out supreme in this world. To you, who are wise, and I bow. With pure bodies formed supremely fine, with motion like a golden mountain. Fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best supreme guide, to you I bow. With the supreme signs, face like the spotless moon, color like gold, to you I bow. You are immaculate, the 3 worlds are not incomparable, wise one, to you I bow. Great, compassionate, protector, all-knowing teacher, field of merit and good qualities, vast as an ocean, Tathagata I bow. Through purity, freeing from attachment, through virtue, freeing from the lower realms. Unique, supreme, ultimate reality, to the Dharma that is peace I bow. Having freed themselves, showing the path of freedom too, well established in the trainings. The holy field endowed with good qualities, to the Sangha I bow. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind completely, this is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a mirage, a flame, a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew, a bubble. A dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see conditioned things as such. Through this merit may sentient beings attain the state of all seeing, subdue the full faults, and be delivered from the ocean of cyclic existence perturbed by the wave of aging, sickness, and death. This ground anointed with perfume, flowers strewn Mount Meru, 4 lands, sun and moon, imagined as a Buddha led and offered to you. May all beings enjoy this pure land, venerable holy gurus. In the space of your truth body, from billowing clouds of your wisdom and love, let fall the rain of the profound and the Dharma, in whatever form is suitable for subduing sentient beings. Idam gururam namandalakam niryataya me. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings.
다 딕송겐.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, that's Geshe Chimbo Shivale Sole. Julian, you know. Dede Kiwanyam Junior Tas. Dede Kiwanyam Junior Ta. The way to Shindu Meseba. Then it's always a just a member, Kishan City number euros. She's somewhat else. Tede kewa stalia she saswa kase. Parazu kewa tugedi chen chenga member nabo chene teba nagunal teba na shi mangchati nabu tikwele de sayo de sercha. No tene lo juana keji chigrenga anti kenke ne chiginji tenga sebo chene member mebe kel kewa dan rawate keji chitam yutam de sewa tongre. O tisonda Maranzola tipo de namjune tizumang chawate tipo sayada kewa drube samlote ngonje sanje namji chalabda tujisne metine kewa chao samsa kewa chande ji kunu da kewa chete pe nyunyu chi mato yomare sara cha tede kewa tetabu se kewa nyamchung la se tede kewa tetabu kewa nyamchung se tede kewa nyamchung ni la ta tipo topchimbo 신도 메세바 되고 톱침보 네버침보 남미진 대부 신도 소규 매버 영화가 대응하면서 개와 찍마르와 되고 사야돼 개와네 개와 통만 매번 단대보다 고 망쳐 되고고 나기 꼼서라 대 개와들고 배저를 치는 마도 칭아 배주 치고 들이대로 대인데 되고 마무 쉬지 와래 개 첩침보 네버침보 남미진 대부 메세바 영화가 진짜 마무 사셔요래 선거라 Tibetan Shindu Mesebas. Tene Sobe Tatipa Taeda Chick. Namin Debu Kanga Yomogo is Taeda. And it check Samlute. Yunza Mata Mevo te Tui Pa Rinzi Tantoye. Nigga Samlute Pa Nyoru Tayach Tujuti. Generation Co. Marsa Tara to Pa Taeda. Tanda Anet Tibeti Saya Tuju Nyoru Ta. Kawasaya Tuju de Marmar Tayach. 탑시는 배우그래서 뭐라 대대 교환염전 일하다 뒤부터 지지는 걔네 저왜 전주 쓰면 봐. 다 대부분 좀바지에 다 교화사도 사야 돼. 저왜 전주 있으면 셴배. 내 교화시야라 대대분 뭐 말해서 telel학 뭐지 요 말해서도 걔네 저왜 전주 쓰면 봐. 그 생각한 시기는 말이었어. 대부 시기는 이제 대부 나사게 대부 다야다. Suna mambo saya ki tab chok de kyo wate chanju ki simle shembe kyo shen te tabu yo ma re te inde chanju ki sim gomba la beba she ko re song do oh yeah.
So here, as the master Shantideva has stated in his guide to the Bodhisattva's way of life, so like the example that we gave last time, here the verse says, virtue thus is weak, and always evil is of great and overwhelming strength. So like that example of a dark night that is sort of black and covered over with clouds, that is illuminated just for a flash, with a flash of lightning. When we have that flash of lightning, everything is for a moment illuminated. Like that example, our virtues are perpetually ever so feeble or so weak. Most of the time we are engaged in non-virtuous actions. To even have the thought like, oh, I should do something virtuous, due to the blessings, the power and inspiration of the Buddhas of the past, is something that is quite rare. And so really we have created the non-virtues, the ripening results of which are basically inexhaustible. And we have done non-virtue basically not just in this life, but in many previous lives. We don't have to think about it. We don't have to make an effort in the way that we do toward virtue. So when it comes to then trying to purify those negativities that we have accumulated in the past, what has the power to be able to overcome them or to be able to deal with those kinds of negativities? It says, except for perfect bodhicitta, what other virtue is there that can lay it low? So in order to purify those negativities that we have accumulated in the past, to not have to experience the ripening results that we have not just in this life accumulated, but in countless previous lives, and to increase the strength of our virtue, this attitude of bodhicitta has the power both to destroy those negativities, to reduce their strength, and to increase the force of our virtue. So if we are looking to be able to do so, to be able to overcome such great negativities, to purify the ripening results of those non-virtues that we have done, and to really be able to create the supreme kind of virtue, we should make an effort at generating bodhicitta. Only this kind of attitude or mind has the power to do so.
Oh yeah. Oh, they got so that. Oh, and the Janju Simdi Tibet diet and Kyots of Lupchim Busai, Julia Drea Cares and other Tibusai, Mancha de Simjela, Sawachebala, then Simjenda don't reach because Tibet Saviora, Mancha de. Oh, Tisonjako Simjelia, Sawachebata, oh, Simjenda Drochibe Negus Tibu Mancha de Tinesaviora. They did that under Simjelia, Pembe Samluch, Kajeshuk Chimbu, but Tesamji, and it Tibet I Kyo Lupchim Busai. Ini kausore lapchero never chero rogoda oti ndugazo chambada chawase chanju semke bala tambu chambada chawata kodwa simje tamje tungwe de trende ji chawada dewada trende ji ni chambe semde koda chambada chawani de kechu chawada oh tungwe da trende ji sembol de shu chimbu yede nga rangi tungwe konjulu tungwe rangi ngene tungwe treba to pa Padre at the teacher word, no meeting to Yomo Goshavara. The other tender you design it, Tiba Mabuchi, Dieta, Kyolapshabuchi aside to Yora. Till the Namuna Kanzo. Tandanga to change you some German mind by K. Manaya. Some general part of the Tungeda Tena, some the ranking when they saw Michesa, Tungegi, some Jesula Rangune, Tungi, Michesa, some Chula Big Man, some. Tewa rangu chi tewa da penta wanda kaje chigi na te chigi samsa de chi samlu ti ko do atine go tsu gura oh ti indu ka so da ti nga zu ke chambo che go do nam yu ne sam je da do di chi be ne go su te do wa te ba ne ba me da ke je she da ten de ka bli a chama ke wa de le ba chi go do ti tu san ti pa sa yo de ke wa sa na ti tu sa ya ko ga yo da or the ticket by the Shung Changman Shake Doangazo. Oh, Simjelia, that is a Marazo Tangi Tamale Lapsa such. Marazo some Simjet as a Kay or a cook catching Maris and Garazo and do it in the or Garazo ship and the Shazire, Kozoke Maris and Giora. Kilia Sanjay Chanju Samatazo Sachin Buddhism. Kilia Deba the chair, the shook chair, the chira. The reader is Sacherba. The Yendation and Maris Gora. Yende chane sanjire chaju sambato so sambi mekebare tezo lockdown na ngara to te ka she tugyore che ki to di tire jora ti kochi yora ti le la waje ke sanjire chaju sambato ma to ka so da cheba pyo to go to de beta nam se me wa da te ke mara ni ngara ya sanam sa e to da ti chi yora ma to so de sanjire che te shanda zo che tu ti le kami ya ta che Temba Soyata, Capture Doctor Soyata, the church catching Soyatira. That church catching Soyati, the Simjalia do ditch, the Tidusan should the lake with the catch a shooting. I tell you, do Simjalia. So Sagashin de la Sanja, the Simjani is Yara. In a Sanja de Kesha, I just soon as the Simja the catching your ticket to say. Titigi or Marese. Ketsia de Karian Goris now, Simbian Coranzo Corder, Coranzo Coranzo to Ngazula Duga Yodes, Danda Yodes, Chipasic Padres, some Timarese. Tell it ten and Ngazula social pendo yoede. Console Chambata Sawa Cometa to enter the combat, socially a all of Chimbusite Nesakda. Or teach and some tangures, and they and Yavares, your Marese. Socially a Kitibata, the Kawatu Lapchate. Sanjay Sumbanashi teacher, the teacher Sumbiora, or Tiki Sambure some. This some of the left Gudwa. Oh, yeah, teach sooner, Mount Dogna.
So here it says that this attitude of bodhicitta has the power to overcome our great negativities and to increase our virtues. It is really the supreme way to increase our virtues. And why is it that such an attitude has such power? Well, it's because most of our negativities are done in relation to sentient beings. We harm them, we are violent against them, we create suffering for them. And so, therefore, bodhicitta, this attitude that really is based upon, in order for us to generate bodhicitta, we have to first develop this attitude of love, wishing for sentient beings to have happiness, the highest happiness, and a kind of attitude of compassion, of wishing for them to be free from suffering. And so, because it is through our negativity, our non virtue, that we have created the causes of suffering for other sentient beings, by meditating on the opposite of that, by wishing for them to have happiness, by wishing for them to be free from suffering, we create a very powerful kind of virtue. And so, on a regular basis, even if we haven't yet developed uncontrived bodhicitta, but to look at sentient beings with this kind of attitude, may that being have happiness, may this being be free of suffering, this is really important. I mean, the way that we regularly look at sentient beings, we interact with them when we're going, when we're walking, when we're talking with them, and so forth. This is really the chance that we have to practice the Dharma. We often have this thought of like, oh yeah, other sentient beings, like they're not important, they're sort of lower than me or maybe equal to me. But Buddhas, bodhisattvas, those beings are really important. And so we have this sense of Buddhas as being high and important. And when it comes to the kind of qualities that they have, yes, Buddhas are superior to sentient beings. But if we have this sort of attitude wherein we make offerings to Buddhas and bodhisattvas, and at the same time don't regard sentient beings with a kind of attitude of wanting them to have happiness and be free from suffering, this is really a misunderstanding. Buddhas and sentient beings are not equal in terms of their qualities. Of course, a Buddha has perfected such qualities, and in doing so is able to act as a source of refuge for us. But that refuge comes in terms of teaching the Dharma. And so the Dharma, the protection that we receive from the Dharma, is the kind of practice that we take out every day, right? So when it comes to, as later said in the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, that Buddhas and sentient beings are equal in terms of being a field to create merit. We shouldn't hold sentient beings as being low and unimportant while holding Buddhas and Bodhisattvas to be up high, but rather thinking for our own benefit. It is in relation to other sentient beings that we accumulate a great deal of virtue by benefiting them, by developing an attitude of love and compassion. And really, this attitude of bodhicitta has that great power to purify our negativities and to increase our virtue. And so, therefore, even out of our own self-interest, we should regard sentient beings with a kind of importance, recognizing that it is independence upon them that we create this great store of merit, and we are able to purify even our most grave negativities.
Oh yeah, roti induka soda. Ngarajo chende che samlata che yora. Ne samlatan de ko simje chambada chawada tabji chato zol samlu yaboda guyora. Ti ta chawa chungna tongban ta kora aliti machuna. Ti samlatan guyore. Ti samlatan ne chizo na dudu samle juwa ta juwa dilep guyusera. Tangazo ti rangja shagira chizo na dudu namju na ji kondu chesa kondu chado chesa chado ndesim chesa ndesim. Taga rang shayani ya kyabs che sanje devaje ta ina yakuda rede. Sanje ke sungudwa. Simjen le chawa che samlo tangda de daga shane ngali ya kyabs che devaje karchen chigore sungudwa. Ti tembarwa. Sanje ke simje tamje tondo kawa tinde che ne tinde ze ne tanda tinde chare ta ngaya tinde che sa ti chane che su rang chane devan do yara. Mado sosul chi yoya ro chi tinde chane devan do de mari ra devan ngone yine meshi kande. Ati inde ko simjen le chawa chi do se ngali ya deva chi che chi karjen chi na sungdo ati ngone re do. Changanzo che samle joa ge do me do naranzo se da rang chumbe. Chi pege chizo na do samle de ma na shi kora shag do. Tili Juju Tanji in Samsa Kod Jangiyoma, Tiranja Shadu, and it talk what you K. You de game and do some such Chishana K. Mudangiman Shir Sam Tagade. The Chizona did some Lutan this Tekom Jakarin, the Samutan Chizona do the Tile chicken, any hours in our tongue in December. Nimatin Desu Tat and the Kaji hour Chisha Samsa, social teacher. Some go Juju Tani Ardo Yara. Or Tinde Mayor, that's all Narazu. Some Lutan and the Chizona found to do Simjan Tata, Nambuity, Yajetan created manner. Ningaman hesitation, some Teora. And that's just in a Kachavan drive me to talk with him with something. What did you
Mm. So here we have the thought of dharma. I mean, maybe we try to develop an understanding of love and compassion. Maybe even we get to a little bit of understanding of emptiness. But none of this is going to be beneficial unless we really change our attitude, our mind, in terms of how we relate to others. If it is the case that we say, oh, yes, I'm studying the dharma, but when we go and interact with others, we just remain as we are, acting toward them with contempt and acting toward them without kindness and so forth. And then we turn around and wonder, well, why aren't my qualities improving? Why am I not gaining realizations? Really, this is a total misunderstanding. So the Buddha has said, if you go around harming sentient beings, but then turn to me and say, oh, I go for refuge or pretend to have faith, what is that going to do? You can't really have faith in the Dharma and go and continue to harm sentient beings. So if we lack this understanding of the whole point being to change our mind, we need to recognize that we're not going to benefit from the Dharma. What we think about, what we so meditate on our cushion, we need to carry out into the world in terms of how we interact with others. And so it is by changing our mind, by changing the way that we look at other sentient beings, that we will be carrying the Dharma into the world. But if instead of that, we just remain as we are and then turn to the Buddha saying, oh yeah, I go for refuge, we can't expect to benefit from that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, the Gasoda. Simje Tamje say de ko. Tando Sosu, Tananga Siwa. Tambo Sosu Namine, Chambada, Zawada, Chitanya Sosu, don't reach us up Kumbayana Sosu Yamdo, and get into Yamdo. There's only some tango, Chambata, Tanya, Sana Samda. Any Simje Tonde Sama around and Namjun enjoy yourself some Tonde Sama Tendecom. Tended come to the Paruchel, Simje Kava Mabada Yashai, Simje Tamje sitting there. Madanga Zote, Namju, Samutan Satazo, Namju, the Chikwachigare, Kaya Mare. Thoughts my dinner condo, I get had the Kanga. And the Simje Tamje, the other said, Simje Tamje, could the other and then Simje the Kawayuna conscious, the bullish and that, rather George, Magazine, ever saw some childhood. Tamje is the socios and Jason got so good. Titun any Paruchel, Simje Tamje said, Simje Karina, the one dollar to him and the Simje Yimba Tamje. Kava meva the yon, and it's some jet tamjel miss at the Yungura. Mother just some jet tamjel miss the same jet and that you and they'll tell us medicate him in the way you ever says a person jet condition around the trail to Wayanaya. The Chipachigandaje. Tandanga so in data, Lumba Chikwa Chulu, Chikwa Miri, Chikwa Chitindera. Tindachi Megacha, the Lagakadi Inako. The one dollar to him and the way in but some just choosing 10 yardona. Tamjel Ming was said the Yungura, Mato Simja Kanga Ocean Gomara. Sangba Ocean and Sangma Dungele, Sanchez, Sangma Truto, and Decade Omara. So than Joachim, Simja Yima, Rig, the Mirita Chulu, Tende Kava Mega Chakuyora. Oh, teacher. Oh, Tina, she did Tandanga, Pena Simja, Chanju Simja Kundi, Marshi, Tende, so she come good. Sinde Pada Mada near the Tachimbuchi, Tina Simja Shanda, so much evidence. Konguyora, did the Chikbares, Kitchpin and Wamasham, the Kawangamanos de Pamachan, Tina Shicha Oresa. The Tandanga Zuti, Chamber Mother Shanda, some not in dinner, she some Togmado, Pamache, or the Kawangama Pamachan get the Ujiride, in the Sam Koto Yamara. Net some Lokoku Yorate. Tapananga Zudine Minetro. Joachim Midge Kevina. Joachim Ama Pama the Karina Telepathy Chilman. Joan the mother and teacher was Mitchell Kid, you know, what you the Kagan now, your mother. Tanda Sentina Shimidua, there's a thing they call Tanda Kadu de Yevate. 무슨 통대 되고 계셔버리 통마도 당마도 뒤에 통마도 단단하게 체디 파마시부 통거래 개와 표현은 제말 함이를 지켜서는 야체디 파마도 미래께 대는 가르치는 게 아이고 말에 나왔지요 말아 야체마도 패사치 무치 계셔버리 중도 어디 인데 거든데 삼을단데 가가 지시표는 뭐 마셔봐 마도 소소 좋아하던 매마도 된다는 거네 집에 가가 그진 집에 버려 아삼사로 근데 삼로 거고요도 어디인데 다 강다른 남주네 지존할 때도네 내가 지도네 저 심장에 셴베 삼을 다시 할 처방벌로야 갸게네 대야 그야게 공부도 안돼 아니 딱배 셴집에 셴주고 셴세대서 개고야래샤 삼자띵가 저 하고도 어디서 심제 탐제게 대주투게게 일이 매봐 저와 깨끗이 연대 군대 이제 강사시 단단히 두기 세월다 뒤에 삼로 된대다 그러마도 남바게 따와데 가셔야 된대 쓰여라 다시 지담에 하 삼겨라 정말 상계에서는 시부 지긴 시거래서 상계에서는 안 했으면 단단하게 먹어서라서 정말 상계에서는 써야 돼 단단히 지기 제제 탈신 버체네 상계에서는 심지하게 되게 탈신 버 두게 지긴 있어요 그러마도 지금 단단하게 맞춰서 단단하게 매스링하는 남준에시 희망한 상계에서는 안테 개물하게 소리도 상가도 저렇게 단단한 것들이 야야도니 야케시는 상계에서 그래 탈신수는 딜레자는 심지하게 탈신 버 두게시 단단한 것들 장이야 줘야지 라고요라 계속다 이때 삼루스타는 심지에 탐지게 단단 소소 개와 춘중지 사업이나 진바추도 서바카리나 단단 춘중들이 저리다디 개와 탈신바 툭툭게 진배 바로도 침바주지 서배 바로도 침바주지 준비 바로 침바주지 교육에서 연대 군대지 랑도르게 내 탐지 신경이 강사진 교화 작인 인세 된 교수는 예심제 정말에 팬도 럽침부치 투그레 삼자 어디에도 된들 남데 예 돈달이야 터바셰 당보 산제 가르송도 섬 터바셰 송창게 될 소소 삼루다 오늘에 말에 삼루다 어디 오늘 야분도와 삼자 이진에서는 삼중 시럽게 어떻게 해서 아니 야내양도 컴디션에 따게도 배째지도 전에 공부 터바다 삼바 공부 전에 림제네 산제지 고반치네 저 터바차 심지어 탐제게 더 툭툭게 더 탈시버 툭툭게 산제지 고반치 터바차 대체도 대톱제게 남라 터바다 삼바 공부 림제 주버차오 jamne chönyebe kulun setam de samba shoes attended.
So here, when we talk about like all sentient beings, often in our prayers and so forth, we are talking about all sentient beings, but this is something that needs to begin with those around us, right? We need to change how we interact with, how we look at the beings that are close to us. So we begin with our friends, our family, our neighbors, those who are around us, and expand that more and more and more. And so if we don't do it in this way, where we actually are changing how we interact with the beings around us, we just remain how we are. We get angry, we get jealous, we yell at them and so forth. But yet then we go sit on our cushion and we're talking about all sentient beings. It's like, well, where are all of these sentient beings? It's almost as if they must be in some other world or something, or we're talking about some sort of amorphous group of beings that is somewhere else that is not connected with us. But really, this is not how we should be going about training our minds. We begin with those who are right in front of us. We recognize that they are no different than us in wanting to have happiness and wanting to be free from suffering. And recognizing that fundamental equality, we treat them all in the same way, regardless of their religion or who sort of their ethnic group or who they might identify with. The way we are able to see all sentient beings as equal is really really in connecting with their wanting to have happiness and wanting to be free from suffering. And so we don't just develop our mind in a kind of partial way, but using the methods of, say, for example, the sixfold cause and effect. We recognize that in the past, all sentient beings have acted as like our kind mother, other than our not recognizing that because they have changed lives, they have moved into a different kind of existence. We can see like the person that we feel close to in this life, our mother, the one who takes care of us, we don't know where she will go in the next life. We will be in a kind of situation where she's unrecognizable to us. So when we see that, yes, it's very easy when someone is being affectionate and kind towards us to feel that, oh yes, they want to have happiness and they want to be free from suffering. We need to recognize that all beings have acted in that capacity towards us. It's only a matter of our not recognizing it because we have moved lives. So we have to develop that kind of recognition and expand it outwards. We expand from those that we are close to. We begin by changing our minds, by treating others as though they want to have happiness and they want to be free from suffering. And in that way, we are able to get to the point where, like a Buddha, we have this impartial kind of wish for all sentient beings to be happy and all sentient beings to be free from suffering. But if we don't develop it and expand it in this way, then again, we're talking about all sentient beings as though it was a group somewhere in some other country or some other world. And so here we have to begin right now where we are at, and we develop these kinds of qualities slowly over time. It's not as though, as some might think that, oh, well, when I get to be a Buddha, if I were able to become a Buddha who has perfected all good qualities, who has complete knowledge of all that should be adopted and should be abandoned, well, then I'm going to work for the benefit of sentient beings. But rather, we are progressing towards that, right? We are trying to get to the point of a Buddha, one who has perfected all good qualities and eliminated all faults. But we start right now. It's not as though benefiting other sentient beings begins at the state of Buddhahood, but all of the kinds of actions that we undertake, however small it might be, we should say, well, should go towards the perfection of generosity, or this ethical conduct, may this go towards the perfection of ethics, may this go towards the perfection of patience. And in that way, we are trying to develop ourselves slowly over time to become a being who has a perfect knowledge of all that should be adopted and abandoned. And so it isn't as though we're like waiting to attain, like have a magic magically become a perfectly enlightened Buddha, but rather we are developing and moving toward that state. And so here, when you're listening to these teachings, we should be doing so with this kind of attitude that I am listening to this in order to be able to develop this within myself based upon thinking about these teachings. May I myself develop the qualities of a perfect Buddha, be able to achieve that state in which I'm then able to perfectly benefit other sentient beings. But again, we shouldn't think that it's something that will come in the future. This is a practice that begins now, and it begins with those with whom we interact on a regular basis. So please set such a motivation for listening to the teachings.
Oh yeah. Oh, that machine do so. That we don't want to see. When they say thing do them, they are aware. That she nyam just said that Marcia said that she wrote to Jesus. Nyamba said that they want to let to me do what she do. She they want to let to me do nyamba they said. And it's that so Miri Chibata, Chulu Chibatin, the Karina Mena, the one to let to me do when nyamba de Orakaga. Then a mini you say, Jesus Miri Chibache, Chi Miri Shanda, Kuni Tunga Nyamba Dada China. Rajan go there, quit Tunga de Seg, so Miri Chibati Tunga Seg, the Samloche, Pajo de Chibachijan Kuni Yamta Wachina Chitile, Bachina Merora Taco, quit Tunga de Tunga in Bitcher Segur, something Taguda. Tunga in Jetisichas, Ragged Tunga de Tunga of the Segur, some good. Pajo made the Tunga de around the Chibanyagunete, Tunga in Bitcher Segura. The way in Bitcher to Jetty, then a mini register some Miri chick da machi kebaki me the kunyin dada nyogune chick the miri chick where shas tunge se wata te watre samta chi the yushana mirror ko o tiso de sigora yambare karishini yawa chegore ta shekude yo mara chezaga 대완도를 통해 매도가 한다 냠바래. 참마 탐제 편주에 찍버려서. 카시에 대화 좀 통해 세고를 사서 카시에 상마다 만들 텐데차네네 딱신 냠바셔야 된다. 네 라진지 통만 매번에 텐데 삼로 따네. 만들니 따도보다 코테래. 다 딱신 채와서 라진지 다신 야완도로 니 집어자 삼로 코고도. 어디지 랍션데 따데 랍고야래 치샤. 야들래.
So here, I also feel like I should say we talked a little bit about the sixfold cause and effect method for developing bodhicitta, but really there is the method of equalizing and exchanging self and others. And here, the sort of reasoning of this is that whoever it might be, any sentient being has equally the desire to be happy and the desire not to suffer. So if we are to take two beings and say one is in your group, whether it's your religion or your race or whatever it might be, and one is outside of that, it's not as though in looking at them you could say, well, oh, the one that has, if they're both suffering, say, to say, oh, the person that's in my group, well, their suffering is greater just because they're in my group. It's the suffering is the same because it is suffering. Because a sentient being is suffering, this is something that is to be eliminated. And happiness, whether it is for someone in our group or any sentient being, is to be accomplished because it is happiness. And so here, not distinguishing like, oh, this is part of my group or someone I know, it's not appropriate to make such kinds of distinctions. When we look at the logic of equalizing and exchanging self and others, it's really based upon this fundamental idea that because it is suffering, it is something to be eliminated. And because it is happiness, it is something to be accomplished. So whoever it might be, all sentient beings are equal in that way. And therefore, it's inappropriate for us to only have concern with the suffering of those in our in-group.
Oh yeah, that is so. That is 당한도 내려서 쇼로가 숨주 쏘고디 봐. 어야 디카르도스나 니바 셰체레도 니바데 카르레도스나 어다 템바마오서 시딘 도르드니 템바시레도 템바마오 셰도와 아니 짐바토와셰 대주 강가 시지셰서 어딘 도르드디 셰바 셰레도 디카르레도스나 텐동세 템바마오 데로와 동아스데 짐바 동아라 소바트 시거라 텐동 시다시 시와 샨디 시와 잡으면지 시원해 되소라 시럽당스도다 아니 최단지네 니가 그 랑도지 시럽하고 셴바테 시거라 디시부디바 디시부딘 도르드니 시거라 상부신데 명안에서 어때다고 상부시다 데베 메용부데스 다 개볼을 담바선자 메원 개볼 시거라 상부신데 메완에 네 최선 넘바시다고 최 상부 넘바시부데 담바다 동하다 네 쇼하다 시럽을 소바테즈베 참마게 이도와다 베 야부 가와체서리레도라 최선 넘바시다고 아니 대칭겐게 아니 개보티야 민남게네 떠버리고서 대시부데 개베 얌레체베이나 대시들은 매상매 가와체번나서 개불에 대시다 냠바송자 아니 개불에 베정아타노 개부데 베 템발에 이치치게레 템발 정부 템발 정된치기리 삼사로 아니 치기 심바통알아 소바다 아니 시월네다 시럽라 소바 상마신게레 삼제 아니 메마초파 때바때바다 가와치기리 에세야탄다레도 민남친이 떠버리고스 야 어디지 랍산디도
So here, picking up where we had left off in the text, beginning with verse 139 or 39 of the second chapter, wherein it is giving a kind of a summary of these four qualities, qualities of truthfulness, generosity, tranquility, and wisdom. So a king who has these four excellent qualities will be praised by gods and humans, just like these four excellent dharmas. So here, These then are qualities which the king is exhorted to have. So here, where it says a king who has these four excellent qualities, so truthfulness, being generous, having a kind of peacefulness, not being sort of coarse or unruly, and the wisdom that has appropriate knowledge. If you are endowed with those qualities, will be praised by others. Others will look to you, knowing that you are truthful, that you are sort of pacified, that you have the kind of wisdom and knowledge that others might rely upon. And so, therefore, he is encouraging the king to develop these four qualities.
Oh yeah, that did it. Oh yeah, that in the man doing it. Oh, can you got it? Oh, that Troy Keber Changi Changi said it. Troy Keber Changi Changi said. Oh, take our shoe to Sana. Yeah, tell a lot of centimeter. She done them by the tea said. Da paper mashi ta curba said. Paper mashi ta curba said. Oh, can you? Kebu in it is what Kebu in it is Shendagan Oka Peleche. The Batuchi Kebu Kabuchi, something ten Chichi, the Yabuchi setting it. Ngoka Peleche, the shed and Yangu Maricha and Goko and Yangora. Mikanga Chiran Chichi Sega Yabusha, Trambutemba the Malaviche, Kabula Lank and getting the order. Or the paper machine said. Kabulia Ngoka Peleche, Kitchen get to the Yabu Marisora. Temba Shangan, one nation get to Yabunya Gurese, paper machines, paper machines, and paper machine tajur was Telia Ichicha or Mato Shandal Ichicha Yomaresera, paper machines, and the bad chosen did the tajur was the Jun Choshe. It was the Samba number Tawas Core, so the Devachon the Choshe was Core, tiene sem number taba yurkiri esiora. Deva chambuchana ane mina saku saya ta ane chikwe saku chunga de mandin mambu saya soso chuchala mambu saya samutana ane yawe umarwa. O tisun da tende chigi oma soso kiabolia chikari ina ka yoba ti chokshi cheche deva chunga de chokshi bacha ormado. Ane mi pesha tende mambu tenge tele yabuche yawu shanda ti chori mewa temba di ungumara. Or paper mache tajurba se. Shirab Ninji said, number Tawa Jubashira. And it should and Jigdangi Chawat Sama Tamjalia, and it should have done Dembaqua, Resigora. Should and Jigdangi Chawat Tamjalia, Shan to Shangura, Martian enemy said to Tagadagan and go Tegra. Sosu Shana, Sosu touch the Ranch and the Rangdog, Sosu Samrutan Tura, the Mari teacher or Samsa Samrutan Tura. Oh, yeah, this was the should and Jigdangi Chawa Kangalia. Langdo Kande Cheko, Kari Kyan, Bakari, and then Bakari Cheko, the Yabushimba, Shen the Quade, Segura. And then Namjuna Kondo Tabuchi Mare, Toa Chunju Chode. Kondo Tabamera, Shelia, Devan Debe, Chambada, Ninjila, so what Tinde Yabu, Desera. Toa She Chunju Che, Shelia, and a Pemba Debe, Pemba, Pendegi Samba. Ninjita, Chambala so attended was called this. Ninja Timita, Jamebaya. The Lenji go na Taduya, Shirotani, Chuja Pes, or did him. Oh, Taji Denji Chawakarina, Kagashiro, Dembache, and then the Jun Choshi Shetro. Oh, Chuja. Nishale appended Debe. The day you look at you then Shibuti Sura. Timameba Dana, and the Tato, and should have done. Tato, and should have done. She and then to the Apevada. Nichiso the Abuton to with the Essie daughter. Yeah, I didn't do that. They should have done the church and pace. Yeah, didn't do that.
Yeah.
This one,
Jigsaw.
oh yeah.
So then the next verse deals with a kind of definition of a special friend or the kinds of friends with whom one should associate. So here it says in verse 140, wisdom and dharma always increase in a king who consults those who are restrained in speech and pure and possess undefiled wisdom and compassion. So here, in speaking about a kind of a person on whom one can rely as a king, it should be someone who, as it says here, is restrained in speech. This is a person who isn't just speaking in order to flatter you or to please you, but rather is speaking in a way that is beneficial, that is actually trying to be of some kind of benefit. So here, if someone is just kind of speaking in order to flatter you, you don't know whether what they're saying is true or not. But a friend like this is someone who is speaking in a way that is actually beneficial, whether or not it might be something one wants to hear. And additionally, someone who is restrained in the sense of having few desires and being easily satisfied is someone who has a kind of pure mind, one could say, in that, again, we don't have to question their motives. If someone has few desires and is easily satisfied, it's less likely they are trying to sort of cheat you or deceive you for something other than just trying to tell the truth. And so here, someone as well who possesses undefiled wisdom and compassion is a friend with whom one should associate. So, someone who is able to, based upon their wisdom, wisdom and knowledge of both the Dharma and worldly affairs, is someone that one can trust. As well, someone who has the kind of demeanor wherein they are have less anger and a wish to benefit others, the kind of compassion that wishes to benefit others, and they aren't sort of stained with this kind of disharmony with others. This is the kind of person that one should rely upon, and wisdom and dharma always increase. So, whatever kind of activities one is engaging in, to consult with someone who, again, will speak beneficially, not just trying to flatter you, will speak in a way that is based upon their having few desires and being satisfied. And they have the sort of knowledge of what that should be done in a worldly context or a dharma context. By relying upon such friends, as well endowed with compassion, then a king can sort of sustain society well. This is the way to keep society going in a good way.
다단다 데티시기도 와. 그 전쟁럽전에 개와 폐 교체벌전을 때 마시기도 와.
Mm.
개와 개보기 자와 야보 상부도 야 폐에 교체벌전을 때 거래. 지난해 저 개벌전을 때 마시. 로봇도 개벌전을 때 거래. 뭐 로봇 가지고 뭐 때는 담에다 세전 거고다. 내가 여러봐. 저저 개와티 개비 자와 상부 자와 지도 종에게 자와 상부도 야보제 표할이야. ene troy kebar chala tamba stambu ti shegdo o ti ki ke shegdo ta troy kebar chala tamba trobo de pebar mashe ta jurba shirab ning ji temeta ane ka se lenji go na ta to shirab da ne chöja peso o tinde de troy kebar chala tamba ine kebar shinde ta ta de shege ro yende te so dan dembe troy tele tengi na ine kebar si kyala kewa to ka ya 폐로 그래서 계속도 뒤뒤 버쳐라 아니바데 야 어디 줄랍잖아
No. So here, just to give the context to giving this definition of a special kind of a friend, this is under the heading of sort of how to rely upon the causes that increase virtue, that increase and develop good qualities. And so the first of the three topics here is the definition of a good friend. If it is the case that a king wants to rule society well, or sort of have that kind of good fabric of society, then they should rely upon friends who are not going to cheat them, who don't have ulterior motives. And so here, by having a friend or having friends who have these kinds of qualities of speaking in a way that is beneficial, speaking in a way that is restrained, having undefiled wisdom and compassion, this then is one of the causes of increasing wisdom and dharma for the king, or really in society.
Oh yeah, that draw kebar change. Change the share san. That is just a joke. It is. Draw the sambabe namda chaja ti keja share to the nyenche. Nitena just a joke. It is. Nika mega pele shengeta pesha mambolo norchala chane tindeshe ni nordo gara. Oh timachi ta niba dirita. Te jesun jugre bas. Draw kebar change da dembe. O kansa konzo labna shinche soso samlata tauchu che urmado mindra ke pele shengeta norchala la soso chane tindeshe te jesu jodane kolo tigra ya uyo marwa. Te jesun jugre bas te shegdo. Niba dirwe. Tambo chera tindiwa che. Niba redo re niba tirda. O da pembar mawa kumba de chidane ko sosolia kebunde chene ko soso pendo yoba de labge kumbure kora kabu kare chigdo tane ani tagas pele sheya da nor chala da tinde ti soso tonda tunge da tinde keji shenge rogwa shenge mambo yongura mado ngone kebe si kyangyalia tambo de tembe tone yakbu cheche pa temba mange chitane ko soso pendo yoba de labge kumbure shera soso tonda re mado kebul ngone si kyang yakbu jo yo lamge yo de kumbure shera 펜바나 마와 컴바테스 냠버시바 테야코테 펜도 예바시 람게이나 텔레 냥게 가고 요레세 펜도 메바시 펠레셰치 노르잘라다 치치 개보양 오가 펠레셰데 자는 거고 테세 논르셰데 텔레 냥게디 마가데 마도 ngone me trambo shangede ko nyembo keje nyembo shita yo maro kera no kudu chichi chege tende chige mo tende chewor sena ko ne yora ko pele so kera pe ya udo tanda tende semban chichi lamna는 고고테 냐가요라 나 들 템바 마와 컴바데 냠버제바 신도코라 대다외자 메냐야 템베 제수 제바코스 대나네자 코케제 냠보 매버지 셰소나 티나시 제 데레제 컴바레샤라 코로나 도 케제 냠보 셴게 추네 티나시 지그르마도 템바 예나야 데데 삼제네코 요 가서 냠버체바 신도코체 대다 왜자 미냐야 스케제 냠보라 매네 그라 노크도 치치치치치나 케제 냠보 매나 템바 예나 테체 수게 텔레제 콤브레체라 코란 카르삼나 티카치 체도라 제네 노드마 모용거라 어데 엔도 가소라 케제 냠보 매나야 로 케제 냠보 매나야 테 케제 당보 템바 셴게 텔레 냠고데 시와라 this was Yambarsheba Shinduko, Tadawe Minya, and then because Pembe Chesu, Cheba Kursa, or Niba, Tadawe, get a Yambu Manaya, Ra, Pembe Chesu Cheba de Shindukumbu Resa, Tendechi Oma Resa, the door, teaching che, the Oma de Tendechiba the door. Tadawe Minya answer, Tadawe catch a Yambu Manaya. Tambo temba yengete soso nyangoro mado soso lawando kesi keba sheshateli nyangyo mare chere teta wena minya ya pembara chene yodo chose kesi nyambo mene ya chitane pendo yoba chene ti nyabado chegu resi wara pena sura nesu tendo ta chambes kena natare chinade natare soya tendaliya 소소리아 달에 잠바다 좋아요. 계속에 매라 소바인데 가보 사카보 쇼든데 제그리 해라. 그 내가도 너브라시 요르데 단달 코팽게 와라. 어찌야 땡고도 티나시리 해서라. 제전년부 매나야 결한티 제나 야가레세 페나 내 소야 단달이야. 달에 잠바다 좋아요. 계속 미쪽에 아니 상부 만약에 매 사회 통일 따뜻한 샤추 지혜를 써봐. 근데 요라 샤추 지혜는 여기를 쓰기라 지금 유전에 또쭉쭉 샤치에 가야고도 말어 되이네. 어디서도 저래 tel 년고래 쓰거라. 야, 뒤질라나 뒤도.
So then the next topic is how it's logical to then follow after such good friends. When we know that someone is speaking truthfully, speaking in a way that is beneficial without looking for, say, wealth or power or something for their own good, here it then turns in 141 to describing how it is logical to follow after such friends. So those who speak beneficially are rare. So when we think about in general, those who are really speaking out of truthfulness, out of not their own aims or wanting to get something from themselves, but rather thinking about solely being of benefit, speaking based upon truth, that is something that is quite rare. And even more rare are those who listen. So most of the time, when those are, say, especially giving advice to a king, for example, they might be in it for their own aims. They're saying something to try to flatter the king, to be able to get something for their benefit, to be able to get some kind of wealth. But those who speak from a position of actually wanting to benefit are quite rare. And rare, too, are those who actually listen when that advice is given. And even more rare than that are those who quickly implement something beneficial. So here, even if it is unpleasant to hear, it is something where if that speech is beneficial, this is something you should engage in, right? When we hear something that maybe isn't pleasant to hear, like, oh, you're making a mistake, oh, you're doing that wrong, but it's out of a place of benefit, it can be quite difficult to listen to that and actually put that into practice. So, however, if the speech is honest, if it is truthful, if it is based upon trying to be beneficial, even if it is unpleasant to hear, this is something that one should follow after, one should listen to, as is explained in the verse that follows, saying, having realized that something beneficial is unpleasant, you should quickly put it into practice, just as a prudent person, in order to become healthy, takes medication even though it is noxious. So, like the example of when we have to take some kind of medicine that might be unpleasant, or, these days we could talk about having to do some sort of a surgery. In general, getting cut into is not something that we see as being good. But when we recognize the benefit, we are willing to undertake that in order to heal ourselves. And so, too, those who might speak words that sound unpleasant, but they are beneficial, if you are prudent, if you really want to benefit from that, even if it seems unpleasant, that is something that you should listen to. You should put into practice, even if it is difficult, just like taking a medicine that might be unpleasant.
오야 다 개화폐 교개발전 라고 숨버드 시기도 와. 처음에다 받고 마셔도 시기도 와. 개복고난데 메타바 콤바테 시기도 와. 그까지도서나 소다 내매 계시다스. 다때 그 계시정에 교개발시 간데 그랬으나 처음에다 받아 저도 가게 메타바에서 삼을 내가 정부 temba 치기라. 대디가 따도 되게 인삼나. 근데 농주 망부체 시마네 티 식탐만데 망부 조제네 걸로 치기라. 대사는 본부도 망부 코란테간테 걸로 망부체 근데 제마체치도 가부체 전에 도가 담메다 용에도가 자 메타바데 딱와리 시간 되게 매삼 대지른가 내가 정부체는 마다 시만 요다 용삼산 되고 요라. 뒤좀 달라 시기도 와. 대가수도서는 근데 소다 내미 계시다세 소다 나자 매버라 소소 체다네 나자 매버 소부 탄다이 못들려 개개 망부 요리서와 사회 통해다 진나자 진담메다 나야다티 개 망부 요라 류초야다라 나자 매버체 때들려 나자 규기 망부 용거래 첼파체 망부 요래 개개 망부 용게 지레서 거라 제가 템부시부 딱바 템바 배틀수 땡기 시부터 이렇게 말해 시티 삼다고 그래서라 소다 소다 내매 계시다세 내매 바다로 소수 체대다 소수 탕부인 바대다 개비시 계기 왕자대다 저도 참만 메다바인 바데 työ카투이나 섬샤고를 소라 소수 체대 따도 땡게 말에 섬 대베링들 개와 야부체 치조 야부점 야부체고요 삼사 치말에 팽거리 델레 팽거리 삼사시고라 나자 매버데 단다 소부 당당히 섬 대기어 말 나차 루불 투촌에 담다 차시브레 자와지에 정부 템버체고래 세오라 개베세 왕자데 텐데게요 말와 대니마저 샤야레 되어라 진짜 대조 상만보다 삼루다네 대주 대베링들 국가 위배링들 약부지에 삼루 땅고래 세오라 미다니네 따공데서 대조 강가 미다바인 삼사 대조 강가 샤야인 삼 단다 마샤 제베링들 약부지고요 삼사 대삼루 통고래 세오라 가르스는 내매를 타대 내려 되어라 속이 타대 치워려 되어라 왕자라 속과 빼주고 타대 그 대화를 되어라 담마 대화를 되어라 어떤데 삼루타나 대배 릉델이하고 지야지 삼루 코고요라 그러니까 그래 미다니네 따공대에서 전에 양다 전대 말에서 전에 양다 전대 말에 철라 지도 nendenze tezo kangade samlo konerwa mitanyela soba tezo kombala tene segura ene chodan tobe chawalia nendenze ne jakure kare de che mai balomna ani tezo sama jochema tunge nyoya soba da chendela yabume ante sama sungyora ni kare chendu dan dembe ko ne chola ne chodan tobe chawala nendenze segura tatunda teach love shanti do. Yeah, this.
So then third is, again, under these sort of special causes for increasing virtue, is then meditating continuously on death and impermanence, as comes in verse 143. So here, this is another cause of sort of increasing virtue is contemplating death and impermanence. When one recognizes that, for example, for a king, that their power as well as their life and so forth, are impermanent, they do work that is honest during the time that they have that. So we see there are a number of leaders who seem to think that things are permanent, or they act in ways that are for their very short-term benefit, and end up, say, going to prison later because of the consequences of that. And so rather than thinking that what one's life, one's power, one's rule is somehow permanent, it says here in verse 143, you should always reflect upon the impermanence of life, health, and political power. The very life that we have is not something that is going to remain. The kind of health that we might enjoy temporarily is something that is impermanent. There are so many conditions that can lead to our health deteriorating. And a power that one might have, the authority that one wields, is not going to remain forever. It is rather something that is impermanent. So we shouldn't think and act in a way as if, oh, things won't change. This is all going to remain just like this. But rather recognizing that even for a king, say, their rule is impermanent. This will one day go away. But the kinds of actions that one does in the course of that rule are going to lead to results in the future. When you have that sense of impermanence, that while you have that power, while you have that authority, you act well in order to ensure that it is going to bring good results in the future. So recognizing that the end of our life is death, the end of like whatever sort of we have accumulated is going to be decline. The end of any sort of wealth that one has gathered is going to be the depletion of that. When you consider impermanence, you do those things in a way that is sort of with integrity, doing that well. And so here, where it says then, um, uh, reflecting up, you should always reflect upon the impermanence of life, health, and political power. That way, you will, with true effort, strive uniquely to practice the Dharma. So, recognizing impermanence causes us to turn away from that which is non-Dharma, recognizing that whatever sort of causes we create now, we will have to experience the results of those in the future.
Oh yeah. 다 니바 년제 주디 시도와 년제 주디는 도르된 바다 개베시 시시 지나다 년제 주 도르된 바다 레도안디 당무 어 되면서와 친주르신 세더라 니바르도 드니 시그레세라 센디 두타도 내게지 마라 신의 특별 동에 와서 시에서 특별히 제바되게 동에 교황의 발레야다 동에 주치그레시거라 시그레세 대체바전에서라 태도 되나야서 내갑지 약고래진 두삼네 기변에 또서 여기 예나야 특별히 얘네 지기요 말이셔라 푸스 내그레셔라 내가 변도 춘주 이거 절 때는 교화지만 동에 잡고 연구는 말이죠 자자 미리 태도 되다고 변도 여봤다고 야 겸해봤다고 통나야 교화지만 때는 민제분 연구를 뒤선다 특별 교화 미리소서 특별히 간대시 이나야 돈다 내가 변도 여배서를 지나 tel고 거네 내주요 말에 교화치마 동행요에다 유ring 불sam을다니 디방에도 계신분에서 거라 대면사와 친주신 신의 특별 동에 와서 시외에서 특별되게 내가 가르쳤으니 교황의 발레야 다 동행에게 주셔야 되래서라 시대에서 대캔버전에 태도 되나야서 태도 단단 내가 누가 껴매버리지 대외 주를 통하여나야 딜레들 특별히 딜레들 주버리기 말해서 거라 어제전 다단다 대면사와 치원 주신세 특별되니 레드 가르스나 텐드데 파 쪼바치그레 텐드께와데 쪼주네 녜드께와 사바질레 주그레스오라 녜드께와데 펜버치그레세 대체네 텐드께와데 쪼바타 녜드께와데 파 펜버치기네 쪼제니가 그거네 동해 와시데서 마음바리 원주 동해 와시데 최도 대화다보 나나야 디바기와 메리소스 어디송도 Tele ane temba be liu long tranche jeba nan tende che yong do do long gire ke ti karindo sene kebe chene soju manje che se kebe tim kande chene soju de bang ro ta nang ba ina so che be de ko su ina so che chong ma ro shenda ko koran kyo kare ne tele pa be ni ba ta che de so de che kyo ma re se kebe chene soju manje che se 교과라 소네 신도 파스 정말이야 소도 배 판쇼도 배 제쇼도 지그래서라 일에 판쇼 제쇼 지그래서 대외 유리 치신도 배냐서 유리 몰이야 체령분에 고유나 소주 방바되게 아니 교화치마다 챈들 이게 가서래 체령분에 줄래도 그래서래 생기 소주바 방바데 생기 체령분 요에 탑시 전에 라마음발 체령분 요에 줄래도 요라 대외 유리 최신 수대배에서 유령부 생리 대도게 가사에나 아니 소주대 방고래서 소주대나니 미체디 요거 소주ren 뭐만 소소 채통도 끼겨라 이기구나 소주에 삼모스 소모스 제기도 파차 삼로코라 코르기요 말에 당기요 말에서 소제 삼로도 마다시 진짜 sonza 트레드 중세 동해야 푸수펜바 교화된도서 어디래 트레드 중세 배 야가르시나 띠바이니 지기어 말에 트레드 중세 내버리시나야 내가서래 동해 중세장 푸수펜배 단디래 지도도서 가도서 대외 된데서 트레드 중세 두장 푸스 펜베 아니 교화 잡고 봤을 때 말해서래 되게 된데서 야 뒤제래야 어떤 뒤에 되던 냠도래도 당마대 야카 뒤에 발로 샤네 뒤서래
Mm.
라라를 직바 매 통신 라라를 직바 매 통신 뒤가 직바 통주로 와서도 라라를 직바 매 통신 자원가시 제발이야 로 라라를 카샬이야 sendel야 직바다 껴게 매부터 통나야 하시고라 sendel야 껴쳐 매바 직바게 매바 통나야 하시고라 직바 매바 통신 직바 매바 통신 치매 돼서야 직바 여바 통화 주나세 sendel야다 텐데 샤와들 슈나 껴게 매네 치매를 동에 영향 주지이나 어디 방구래서라 라라 직바 매 통신 뒤가리 직바 통주로 와서 sendelya tibele to tanda delya ke mene mahobalya jigba to le to ne pa khuyora kede chigla yi to na so sendel kya mendo som kebe wanja ne sendel ti tanda de cheshana ke ke me sam tibele chane de hamare sera sendel ke mendo sam ne te tibele chigna tibele de mahobalya se chemal ke yongure da sam ne ti pangba de karjan pagyo mar tela jigni pangku re segara oh de dos chawangashi rowa chawangashi lala sude chawangashi so lala se khashaza lala jigba me thongshi se chawangashi chabala chendela jigba me ba thongshi kyo me ba thongshi se ro chime dolya jigba yeba thonga juba ina segara lala jigba me thongshi tyengari jigba thongjuro ase oh yeah kede chigla yito nase sindele kyonge mendo asamsa tenje ane chawadele jogba yina mande rese ni kewa chema donge yongre samne o chema nami yongo re samne tele jigni pango rese gara sinde jigba meba thongshi chime tolya jigba yoba thonga jo yina sigora kede chigla sindele jigba mendo sam kede chigla jigba 마통에 이더니 아디케 메도 챈델케 메도 삼 차와들 조기나 만디레세 오 교와치마 동에 연구를 다 삼제 될 때는 니테 빵고레세 거라 돈에 쫄을 찍고데 민지데 라 안에 지고레세 교와치마 동에 용했더라 지고레세 어디 버리실랍나 지기래 야
So then the next topic that we turn to is exhorting the king to abandon the cause of the lower realms, beginning in verse 144. So this, again, based upon the recognition that one won't remain forever, this is saying that we should avoid the kinds of causes that will lead to future suffering. So seeing that you will definitely die, and that when dead, you suffer from your negativity, do not engage in any negativity, even for the sake of temporary pleasures. So it is certain that we will definitely die, and after having died, we will have to experience the results of the karma that we have created, the kind of propelling karmas, and those that are the accomplishing or sort of completing karmas. So here, if one has created the kind of causes for, say, being born in the lower realms, or even if born in the lower realms, also experiencing the kind of suffering that comes from those completing causes as well, if we can see, if we have a kind of faith that those results will come about, then you should avoid those kinds of negativities. We don't want to get cheated by thinking that for some sort of temporary short-term pleasure, it's okay to do something that will lead to long-term kind of suffering. So once this good rebirth that we have right now is exhausted, is used up, we are going to have to face the consequences of the actions that we have accumulated throughout this life. So here in the commentary by Gyaltsabje, there is a verse probably from the sutras. It said from the chapter on sort of truthfulness, or the truthful speaker, that says, you king, don't take any kind of life. This is really, again, talking about the causes of being born in the lower realms. All sentient beings cherish their life most. I mean, when we think about what it is that we as sentient beings cherish the most, it is our life. And so, this most cherished and special thing, we shouldn't take away from others. We shouldn't take the lives of others. And so, by doing so, we not only cut our own life short, cut the life short of another, but we are creating the causes to cut our own life short. So therefore, one should give up killing as well as even the thought of taking the lives of others. And so here, as it says there, like even if there is what seems to be some kind of short-term benefit, recognizing the long-term harm, this is something that one should avoid. And so it doesn't just apply to killing, but all of those other non-virtues. And continuing then into the next verse, 145. In some cases, the dire result of negativity is not observed. In other instances, the dire result is observed. If there is comfort in one, why do you have no fear of the other? So here, when we see, like for example, that this kind of bad negative action is going to result in something that is fearful. Like we recognize that the action itself is going to cause that kind of feared result. We avoid it. Now, there are some cases where we can observe that. We can see the bad result that comes to us. And if it is the case that we then shun negative actions, recognizing the bad results that will come about, why is it that we don't avoid those negative actions, even in the cases where we don't see the results that will come about, but we know they are coming? So here, maybe we think that this is going to benefit me right now, and sort of push aside those future sufferings, but we really shouldn't neglect to think about those. Seeing that we are going to experience the results of the actions that we have created, this is something that we should avoid in any case. So it isn't just the kinds of actions that we can, or the results that we can see that we should fear, but we should fear those that we can't see.
Oh yeah. Tanya ba ngen de ju 개발 시에바도 시에도 년도 주디 개발 시에도 전전도 시고네 창을 잡아 가와서 당부들 창을 잡아 가와서 어느 이번 방전구라 개를 잡아 가 그거 원내 용구라 당부들 창을 잡아 가와 년도 주 개발 시에바들 창을 잡아 가와 들으셔 어디 가르도서는 년도 주 개발 시에도 시도 아티는 당부들 창을 잡아 가와서 창기 지대니에 주르시 창기 견도 세요라 창통이나 담보된 지대바 담보니네 고 창통도네 창통게스레 샤삼 ene nyabje chigre so ra tojo chigre so da ko changto rasi ne ko ke je kanjuma ju she sheba kanjuma ju kya che yongre som tambu ne ko changtong ge de kya tong gre se wara changge ji den ye ju se ji den ba zu nyabje chi tongjo chigra 대에 노양 세번 주세 상계 지대에 버 주세 소소 된다도 내가 제이네 된다데 충동에 망보용으로 창토는 거 거네고 얘네 논주게 좀 망보셔는데 논주용으로 소소 된다 주에 대하고도 말을 시거라 대에 세거라 안 노양 세번 주세 배사 망보자고는 또 같은 조선 땅한테는 노래 된 조바세 주래 저래 노야 세번 주세 창기 지대에 주세 대에 노량 세번 주르세 네 몸배샤 마인시에세 네 창토는 라시네는 시라시라 코라 셰바랑 신도 내요 말와 남주나시 말와 네 그 논주 마부시는 몸배 미시베 왕게 저 마인바 마부 논주 마부치그레스 거라 몸배 저 마인바 수시 마인배 저 주민이 집이 저 마부치그레스라 등당 논주 마부치그레 대외 창안에 따도 본세 어디 손자 창대 거두이나 방구레세 걔네는 그 계시 장계다 들에는 telleja 방구라 네 창마불로 네 라시에 네 깨져다면 시에간가 노르체 내가 전부 요라 어디 손자 창대 개불에 담기어다 지담밀에 창대 방구레세 담기도 창기단 데데 껴야데 직시데 셰바랑셰도 메네바 요레글레스로 사기 있어라 남주 셰바데 미 셰바 쇼마 마임바데 대초요 말와 바라베르시 엔데 김나샤하다 배전하려고도 천도 대화 공부데 뇨아 대화 공부하시 지스데 뇨서 버서 샤가 소소 셉탄 주 멤버샤가 아니 끼우레 서고 있어라 전대지도 남바전에 창대야 개천부신에 가그라 산제 좀 된데 진주인의 창 사제 시버점에 통하면 자세 사회 제목이 알람에 시버점에 마통사에 속도 야 뒤질람나 뒤서
So then next turns to an extensive sort of explanation of the causes of lower realms, or those that are to be avoided, beginning with refuting attachment to alcohol, coming, or intoxicants, we could say more generally, coming in verse 146. So it says, from intoxicants come the world's disdain, your own failure, and the loss of your wealth. Confused, you do what you should not, therefore always refrain from intoxicants. So here there are many faults that come from imbibing intoxicants. The first of which is that really you're sort of seen as contemptuous within the world. There's a kind of disdain. Others look upon you as being like, oh, well, that's someone who drinks alcohol or is constantly intoxicated. And so not only do you gain the disdain of the world, but many faults come from that as well. So you aren't able to accomplish your own aims. Becoming intoxicated, you aren't able to successfully carry out whatever work it is that you might want to accomplish. And not only that, but your wealth is exhausted. Intoxicants cost money, and therefore, when you engage in them, if you're constantly buying alcohol, your wealth will also be depleted. And out of the kind of lack of conscientiousness, the delusion that comes from being intoxicated, you no longer are able to distinguish between what you should and shouldn't do. And so therefore, the kinds of faults that come, again, the world's disdain, your own failure or inability to accomplish the aims that you might want, the loss of your wealth, and the kind of confusion in which you lose your own ability to distinguish what is right and wrong, or what you should and shouldn't do. These are the reasons that one should always refrain from intoxicants. So here, when someone drinks or imbibes other intoxicants, generally they act in ways that they might not normally. They might say whatever it is that comes to their mind. The things that they should and shouldn't do become irrelevant. There is a kind of, again, we mistake this sort of disturbance of mind as being happiness. Like we're sort of out of it. We can't really identify anything. We can't really think clearly about anything. And some mistake this as a sort of happiness, a kind of pleasure. Although in reality, it is the kind of cause that is going to lead to our downfall, to our ruin. So intoxicants are something, therefore, that should always be refrained from.
뭐야 다 니방에 되죠 니바데 셰도아 대가레스니 갬블을 잡아 가봐서 되려도 니바로 가만둬서 니바 갬블을 잡 갱자야 쇼더버들 자다 바자다 근데요라 갱주제네 제무제시 대체요라 쇼바자 쇼자 바자들 대산담에다 용구도 갱주제 어딜 잡아도 미래세라 어디 갈 수도 없으나 딜에 꽤 고시해요라 갬부제 들려 갱샤네네 치치에 들려 꽤 고요데 대선자 대자와를 말해서 거라 갬부세 차다세 갱조네 대치에 들려 아니 미 노라 착배경 요래서 나 노드 그 노드 탐나 삼기라 티 마칠렘바 잡은 조위서 마칠렘바 퍼조데 배셔텐도 요 말아 다이네 코코고라 퍼지데 마치신도 코데 코에 탑시지라 제모제제니 겐디 샤자가 탑나 삼제 당분에 남자 요라 제자 코티 당부들이야 가리오라스나 차당하세 현재 노라 착배죠 요래 당나 거기 배셔데 탑나 삼기라 아니 다타 용어 쇼용어 삼야 랑게데 쇼마요 삼야 메가에 요래 그 삼배지요 말에 당부지네 지전 단쇼르만도에 삼제 메가 용거래. 근데 콘도 용거래. 지자디면데 그 세단다 지자디면데 콘도 잡으쳐 공감다 요로 쇼용 삼타 아용사. 진데 그 콘도 용거래 이메도 예전 그 시다 콘도 잡으 용거래. 근데 그래도 유주 요다 교용거래 유주 용거래. 요 전에 지 멤버들 인도도 인도도 멤버도 시야데 지금 마무치야 요라 잼치도사. 나도 지연도도 시야 지 멤버도 시야로 지 퍼주던 거고 나야 전달에 남을 시야요라. 유주세. 안에 가래 유주세. 근데 선배 톤에 가서 다 되면 되면 좀 선배 시원 얘기 말고 그거 그래. 그거 내셔라. 안에 중에 적진 시하고나 적진 또 시야 그래. 나게 시그래 다시 그거 다야 된다. 식수부터 깨져 뚜저든데 시그래. 대회 따도 따도 빵버져. 대회 따도 괜찮아야 돼 빵고래 선거라. 괜부쳐야 돼. 대래 교구요 돼서. 하다 교구부터도 담은 서 시기 놀라 샤고치요 돼. 에라. 이 괜시베 토담에 토냐는 심미지와 연구래. 아니 삼성을 콘도 연구래. 유주치그래 시기에도 맨도 만부쳐고래 괜찮듯아. 어때네? 전체가 계제 치수불어서 봐. 그냥 만부 용해도 와. 어떻게 줄랍는데도. 단다고 미 너무 마침 벌림배 잡고 차기도 와. 미 잘라데 로 땅에 떼기요 말어 탑사가 세우는데 단다고 미 잘라데 대바 매신도 꼬야 탑시지가라. 야, 됐어.
So then next is refuting gambling. Gambling, all kinds of games that we might play, like dice or cards or all of those sorts of things, here are listed as having 9 different faults. So the verse reads, gambling causes attachment, unpleasantness, and anger, deception, trickery, and an occasion for wildness, lying, pointless chatter, and harsh speech. Therefore, always refrain from gambling. So, gambling or sort of playing games to win the wealth of others often becomes sort of like stealing, because we are really trying to get the wealth of others without them giving it to us, right? When we win it in a game of gambling, in a game of dice or whatever, it's not as though they want to part with this. So in some ways, this is very much akin to stealing. So here, as far as the various faults that come from gambling, when we ask, well, what are the 9 sort of faults? First is attachment to others' wealth. Again, there's a kind of covetousness. We want to take the things that others have, even though they don't want to give them to us. So there's that sort of almost like stealing quality to this. And so there's also unpleasantness in the sense that our mind is mentally unhappy. When we are engaging in gambling of any kind, there's a kind of like worry. Oh, am I going to win? Am I going to lose? Am I going to lose my wealth? And so forth. And so there's, we're sort of on edge. We don't experience kind of happiness in that, but rather there's a mental unpleasantness that we can experience. We can also have anger. We get mad when we say don't win, or we don't get what we want. Gambling also leads to deception and trickery, trying to deceive others to get those things that we want without being honest. And then it also leads to things like an occasion for wildness. I mean, when we're sort of in the throes of gambling, we might do and act in ways that we don't normally do. Also, there is lying. Again, when we want to win something from someone else, we might be inclined to lie, to deceive them in some way. Gambling also leads to pointless chatter and harsh speech. We might, in the course of our gambling, say things that are quite harsh to others. And so, therefore, always refrain from gambling. Here it lists out these 9 kind of defects of gambling. And again, it's being akin to stealing, right? There's this sense of we are trying to take the wealth of others through these kinds of untoward means. And so gambling, not only does it have all of those kinds of faults, but it's almost becoming like stealing in a certain way.
Oh, yeah. So I did it, because of the 그래서 어야 다 숨바들어. 숨바 빼매질이 메장아 찔까봐서. 메장 빼매질이 메장아 까봐들이야. 아니 숨되지 시기도 왔던데 숨 메장아 찔까봐서 되래. 다 당부되라. 니때 당분에 야보칭에는 뭐든 티 연구야. 내만 같이 시간도 가서 시간도 봐. 디크들레디. 에디 빼매리 견저래 샤세. 되게도 시기도. 진짜로 시와라 파타티. 자 디디 삼고라. 디 공공개데 가르 공부해서나. 지다 럽도 중아도 결론이나 빼매리 착바데 시험부용나 고치는 따고 가라 시했다. 빼매이나 빼매 럽중마이나 깨벨류리아 현자 중앙이나 대 현장도에 치도 버저디 연대도 삼마다 껴지 삼을 당고라. 거기에 뒤 말을 삼자. 뒤천에 세계 얼마도 지나고 매 정말이한테 계시기 오마라. 럽도 좋아. 이번에 그 다좀버에 차에 제 현달이야. 내다 류다 롱줄 착바 배지 매버체. 아니지 개바 포모 착발에서 버텔레 현자 친구였나. 아니 디바시에 도달이한테 껴지 삼을 당게. 어쩐데 가슴으로 지금 삼을 당고라. 디마도 되지도 패밀리 껴쳐봐 말에 디 시계반을 코르 세버도 다와다고 시계반을 세버요래. 디 럽주 개바에는 패밀리를 신장도 고요나 디다고래서. 패밀리는 개별을 신장도 고네 개별을 메서 다고래서요래. 단다 디나래 디올이야 용구도 자고 코로나를 용구도 패밀리를 메서 다고래서. 디나시 소소를 개별을 메서 다고래서. 직발에서 디시에가 남아도 양디 될 견제 체계요마데 셰바보데 럽중 임베찬에 코 현자께서도 패밀리스도 들이야 현자에는 현장도 베탄달티 체고요라. 그 지단 김바에는 현장도 고야께면은 코티게 따고야께요 말아. 다시기요 말아. 참상라데 이제 야트베 가외요라 패밀리 때보다 직전에 막무셔요. 근데 국가들 가래나 땡해 그래. 패밀리 메상 셰드사 개바에는 패밀리를 현장도 고는 때 삼당 그래. 럽중 마에는 개별료리아 삼루당 그래 아마도 지금 디 초직 장장을 뒤쓰기요 말아. 어디야 네 그러마도 패밀리 견주시고 있지 삼주 연구도 와. 디 낭벨로리 전에 패밀리 견주셔야 돼요 말에. 그때마다 집에서 가시나 때베가 요르면은 단단치기를 마토시 류를 쌍마다 메장와 지도자 개바다 패밀리가 류 메장와 지기를 마토 식디 쌍마를 시서버 텐데서요 말아. 가지디 치르바이네 리마도즈 류디 배 쪽바르시라. 김나 포함해서 컨트롤하고 나를 용주고 말아. 실로셔그라. 앞에 그 김나 포함해서 뭐 추통사카가 지오라. 그 류디 메장와르시거라. 남바상계 좀 된데서도 짬에 다던 생기 동바서래. 류를 가게 메장에는 단단해서라. 카셰 빼말게 카셰 잠줄게 근데 말에 깨서 규제에 찍바리 밤에 구달된 깨서에 찍바지가래 가가 류 메장에는 가가 찍바리에서 그 토메 생게도 저게 마셔데 개치 생게다 도저히 릭 시대 텐데치그라 릭 아셔데 게리다 잠시리셔라 테베리셔라 텐데치그라 어때서 상계에 송고도 와 특계점 얘네 류리아서 당조세데 제요 막 찍바지자래서래 그러 아니 건저 류디 메장와 찍바이나 잠시이나 돌바이나 찍바래서 주전이 찍바래 계산에 찍바래 디케케면도 와서래 다 말에 그 장매류 장에 다 대생기 동바세 아주 동담에 시세그라 얘네는 장에 다 대생기 동바세 류메 장한다 다다야 장에 다 가봐요서 잠시도 다 고란 장만 있으라 류의 장마 다의 장마 지부디 다의 쪽바 류의 쪽바 쓰게라 장에 다 대생기 동바세 장매 다지요 말에서 찍바 지자 류메 장에 얘네 류랭고 타데베 장매 다지 로가요 말에서 다를 장마장 지에요 말을 류를 장마장 지에요 말이지 년된 전부제 가고요라 산재라고 송샤요라 어디인데 당연히 로지 마부도 개미 배드 지금마시지 rabducho 산재 좀 된대 아니 배 농부에 가나 제보다 제보 강가야 따가요네 제 산재 원에 데려와서 간디시거다 되게 어려워서 이 산재에서는 어디 강가 찍버리 제가요 그래 되게 거기 마부 연구도 나리야 어디 강가 찍버리다 그래서 마한테 남도 소샤르마도 강가 찍버리 찍야를 계산민에 이렇게 양이요 말해서 또 소소 제발래 보다 냠바체네 제발 상부도 냠바도 세텐데 용기를 마도 이렇게 잠민에 또 같이다 야가치니요 말해서 송구도 농바도 땅에 치소 닝바로 강가 할래는데 제보도 저 백개다지네 산재 군들 깨지다가 용구도 경원에 그래서 그냥 릭마 pomoci rab도 총알에서 그 rab도 좋은 야지 통보를 제 대초요 말아 거기 실로 대다 시부 두자지 랑신기 두자를 찍어라 수선남도 소샤게 쓰요 말아 같이도 배 레지다 두즈 텐션을 요자고 참았은 게 알아 되게 되지 다 등산도 다다 누가 알았지 오야 대선단디 가도 쉐디 띵에 오래다 마도 디방에 신을 던져온 것도 오야 티치나
So, then next, in terms of the subjects or the outline here, is turning to abandoning attachment to women's bodies. And so here, this is in various topics of, in general, refuting that women's bodies are clean. And so here, we need to first begin by giving some context to this, because there are some who, upon hearing these particular teachings, think like, well, what is it? Why do Buddhists have it out for women, or why are they disparaging women? And so we need to understand that first, this is taught for a particular purpose. The main audience here would have been monks, those who have taken ordination, and this kind of teaching is in order to counteract the kind of attachment that they might have had to women's bodies. In order to get rid of that attachment, it is taught that they are particularly unclean, but it's not as though this teaching is intended to imply that women are inherently impure and unclean, whereas men are not. But this is, again, contextual. If one were speaking to a group of nuns, we might be speaking about the uncleanliness of men's bodies, because the purpose would be to get rid of that kind of attachment toward men. Whatever is the object of one's attachment, teaching about their bodies as being unclean is in order to eliminate the kind of desire and attachment that we have towards that. So it isn't as though one or the other, men or women, is being singled out as being particularly unclean, but we should recognize that this is taught for a particular purpose. So when we are trying to get rid of that kind of attachment, I mean, maybe there are, say, monks who have been able to eliminate their attachment for lots of food and lots of bedding and clothing and so forth, but they still feel a kind of attachment towards women. Teaching about the uncleanliness of their bodies is really to reverse that. And this is something where it isn't as though one's own body isn't also unclean. You can turn that meditation toward one's own body and recognize the body that you have as being unclean as well. And so this is something that we need to understand quite clearly. As Chandrakirti has stated in his commentary to Aryadeva's 400 verses, this is dependent upon who the audience is. If you need to get rid of desire for women, that's why we talk about the uncleanliness of their bodies. If the object is to get rid of desire for men, one can take men's bodies as being unclean. Or if one is looking at one's own body in order to eliminate a kind of desire towards that, we have thinking about our own body as unclean. So one shouldn't see these kinds of teachings about the uncleanliness of the body as being particularly directed at women or somehow disparaging women, because the Buddha's teachings are very much about equality. When we think about the uncleanliness of the body, we are all equally unclean, right? So there are some who, in the traditions, like say in Hindu traditions, the context in which the Buddha would have been originally teaching, they looked at lower castes, those of a lower sort of rank in society, as being inherently unclean. And the Buddha's response to that was, oh no, we are all equally unclean, right? We are all, wherever we might be born, we are all sort of born from this same womb, right? Made of up of unclean ingredients or unclean materials. And so, whereas some schools, like the Hindus, might, for example, look at certain castes, like the Brahmins and the sort of ruling castes, as being inherently clean, and then they look down upon the lower castes, like they don't even allow them to come into their house, or they think that their shadow is unclean, and so forth. This kind of thinking was really challenged by the Buddha, who ordained those who were of a lower caste, who ordained women, and they were allowed into the monasteries or into the nunneries. And so, whether of any type of body or person, the Buddha taught that we are all sort of equally unclean. It isn't as though we can look at in one group and say inherently those beings are unclean, or they have some sort of inherent negativity to them, but rather higher, lower castes, we are all sort of, none of us enjoys a special kind of purity. And so in that older model of society in which the Buddha originally taught, some were quite surprised, really maybe even shocked by the fact that the Buddha gave ordination to those of lower caste, gave ordination to women, those types of groups that might be seen as inherently unclean. Now, our modern society might be a little bit better. We don't necessarily have those kinds of judgments, but here we should be clear that even though this text, for example, gets very much into detail of the uncleanliness of women's bodies, the Buddha has taught that we are all equally unclean, and this is taught for a particular purpose in order to eliminate desire, not out of a kind of disparagement of a particular group.
Oh yeah. Tandi ma lo shandira. Tapi meji li mi tsawa kakwa telia. Kasi tsawa kakwa telia. Tambo kakwa dosa. Oh yeah. Wade. Pe meji li tsawa chir kakwa. Tsangma yinba te chir tang kakwa she. Tenzen kashe she kudwa. Ine sosor kakwa she. Ine mi tsawa komben jebu she. Tanda mambu she kita tina ma panche yungura. Tā tāmbu pēmē yulū mē tāngwa chir kāwa, chir tāngne shir kāwa āshe tere. Oh ya. Pēmē lūla chakba, pēmē chakba pēche nē se tā pēmē liya kēba yinā rabchū yinā kārī, kēba yinā pēmē li chakba, tā pēmē nē kēba li chakba niga yungurā. Chakba pēche nē, nē pēmē tā kēba kāyinā tī sū, tāngwa, mē tāngwa rāngshīn yinā yāngko, tsawa dāng yundā yuwa chik samlu tāni nī tili chaku yawa rī sūrā. Tēmbē sūsāng sīmlē chūng sūdi tsāngma yabu chī yīmba nabdō pā tā chī tī wāngi nī chakpa yungu rī sūrā. Tēmbē lūla tēndō nī tsāngma chūng sā yu mā yī. Tā tēmbē lūla ya chākshīn tō kōngi chī yī na, nī lūla ya tsāngma mē wā mī tsāngwa rāngshīn tū samlu tāng na, nī kō āwa tī nī rā chakpa shī rī mī tū samsā rī chī. chakpa pe ndo matu na ya, chakpa chungru chini ma chakpa re si wara, shenja menge chakpa re si wara. O ti tundal kongu wara. Tandi pe rabchung, rabdu chungwa tang, chidane ko shenja tre kongi tinde ina. Ane peme ina, kebe lula me zang kongya. Keba ina peme lula me zang kongya. Niga shegi wara. Tanda cheba bo kalong yinba chane, ane peme lula me zang wati shegi wara. Tin dokcho ti, pēmē yinā kēpē lūla mē sāngwā tāku bā tī chīkbā rē. O yā, pēmē chākbā pēchā nē pēmē lā shēnchā yōngyā tī kārē sī lū tī tāngmā rāba chī shēn nē. O tē wā kē lū mē sāngwā rāngshī chā yīmbā tī sāmlū yā wā khor mā tū nē. Nē tē lē yā kō tāng jīng chā nē 제왕의 신자도 연구하래 서라. 류 두째도 좀 미상도 야보 삼거나 언제 근데 신자 전부터 용 말해 서라. 그러면 수자 semlecho 수대 장마다 봐. 미상의 신대 삼로마다는 장마다 시비치 삼로 거기 온 거래서. 그러면 류라 돈돈에 장마 좀 세요만 개바다 그러면 류 가리나 돈달이고 류리야 장마치 시비치 여봐 말해 서라. 대가래서는 단디 오는 마시에 저리 딩딩마다 야. 대출로서는 되지래. 차베베진의 소좀 미상을 땅을 좀 배선벌 때는 좋아해 싫어. 내 뱀에 유로라 돈데 땅마치다. 근데게 여보 말해서. 지칠럽나 되기도 와. 야.
So here, this is divided into various topics, beginning with in general, a refutation in general of holding women's bodies as being clean, and then getting into a refutation of the sort of holding individual parts as being clean, and then the result of meditating on uncleanliness like that. So again, here, whoever it might be that we feel attachment toward, we feel a kind of attachment holding to them as if they were sort of clean or pure, right? And if one wants to avert that attachment, to get rid of that kind of attachment or clinging to that, reduce that in some kind of a way, then you need to think about the uncleanliness of that body. So again, this was taught, the author of this is a monk, and therefore he is speaking to an audience of monks and speaking about the bodies of women. But we can take this as the bodies of men, whatever the attachment, the object of our attachment might be, because the author here was a straight male who is attached to women's bodies. That's the kind of object that is used, but we shouldn't take that as being exclusively so. We can put in whoever's body we might feel clinging or attachment to, and we cling to that. We feel that kind of attachment out of mistakenly holding that as being pure or the kind of source of pleasure. So here it says then in verse 148, most attachment to women comes from the belief that women's bodies are pure. But in actuality, there is no purity in a woman's body at all, or a man's body. So here, it isn't appropriate for us to feel that kind of attachment toward the form, the way that something looks, because when we feel attachment towards that body, it's as though we're holding it as though it's pure, as though it has some kind of pleasurable aspect. But in reality, there is no purity there, not in the slightest, and therefore it is not right to be attached to that.
그래서 다들 말로 야. 아까발래서 다들 저래. 야. 다들 다단단데 매장에 배 착과 미륵바 시에도 담부달라. 매장에 라시 깨바다 뱀에 가이나야 대르리아. 아니 현자를 말했대. 매장에 라시 제제를 대선도 착바를 말했어. 기시도. 당분에서 그냥 아주 류코랑게 속바다 가게 용사가 싫어지래서 개바 뱀에 가이나티 류리아 장진도 그거요나 현장도 그거요나 아니 그게 삼로도 그거라 다디 가르스는 칸에 가지고 답변에 칸답시네 가주다 근데 가에 나가 소다당 가지고 카도도 주시라 제고도 그 가에 주도 르바다 소진에 소자를 소바 근데다 칼레트 마카엘을 소바 근데 삼로도 그래서 거라 칸에 가지고 르바다세 소자세 소유관리야 까보도 근데 여기 가지고 소투구라 아니 소자 미산에 인데서 칼레 차셔내고 장마지 시버지게요 말해서 미산에 라시 팀마다 아니지 소다 대주간가 가에 가지고 버려서 뭐 대주 개바도 뱀에 가이나 tindere서 거라 나네 반나고 내 자신은 납둘로야 당치되네마 나 주자야라 소바한테 용거라 뭐 대주시오라 나네 나나 주녀시라 어때나시 미그니 미드 치매가 미그도 치네 미그 뒤 용야 요래네 치마다 미추 용야다 텐데 용야 요라 텐데 네 지레스 마치 미상와는 자에도가 가가 온비 코트스 가가나 마티스거라 네 나네 텐데서 메니 미치 네시 오래 다테 인디도 텐데 시레 카니 카줄라서 봐 텐데 네다 미상와 카다 나다 메다 어디서 상만에 미상와를 써봐 대전 자유가 내려서 다 개발이나 변매를 신장도 공개이나 됐다고 그래 변매이나 개발을 신장도 이나 됐다고 하라 어떻게 질랍나
So then there are various sort of topics here, beginning with refuting the sort of individual parts of the female body as being clean, or the individual parts of the male body as being clean. And so looking at how the body is solely the sort of uncleanliness, it isn't right to be attached to that. So beginning with verse 149, so we think about the various parts of a body that one might feel some sort of attachment to, like the mouth or the eyes and so forth. And here it then reads, her mouth is a vessel of impurity, with putrid saliva and gunk between her teeth. Her nose is a pot of snot, phlegm, and mucus, and her eyes contain eye slime and tears. So here, when we think about the body toward which we might feel a kind of clinging or attachment, maybe we see the mouth as beautiful. When we actually begin to think about what is within our mouth, I mean, we have to brush our teeth for a reason. The mouth is filled with putrid saliva and all this kind of gunk between the teeth. When we turn then to the nose is filled with all kind of mucus and snot and phlegm dripping out and so forth. And so too, the eyes as well contain these kinds of impurities, like eye slime and tears and so forth. So if we are looking to get rid of our attachment to a woman's body, or get rid of our attachment to a man's body, contemplating in this way the impurity of all of those parts that comprise the things toward which we feel attachment is the way to get rid of that.
오야 단데네 마 르게 또아스데 거기에 나로를 쳐서 삼르탄 시거라 럽준 포모카리나 신자도 공개 텐데네 때 삼르탄 고요라 또에 공내 상지다 거기에 나로이네 고 잡사다 쪽보다 텐데 요라 네로아다 침발로 소바치 제주 나자 주말로 소바다메다 강가 요라 어때서 강가 삼르탄라 또에 공내 상지다 네 로아 침바 소지 내려서 거기 나로데 미상 마부지 칸데베 내려 마도 디자인먼 진시오 말해서 몽베 몸이 르메 마토와 다데 이나야 고 몽베 왕그 르디 땅만데 버틴데 지신에 니 신자 용거라 donda kaso toya nanglo de shangji da ane lowa da chimbala soba tezu kanga kawe ne sora tende yimba metang samlu de mato wange te lule ya ne chakwa chi wa re sora tadi rabjun keba yena pamele shanja yungu ne te kaya tanda te samta ore rabjun ma yene kebe lule ya tende samta ko re sora ta ti silam de
So here then it turns to the kind of impurities within the main part of the body. So it reads in 150, her torso is a container of excrement. When we think about what's within our body, the things that we are going to expel, our excrement, our urine is within there. Holding urine, the lungs, liver, and such. The confused do not see that a woman or a man is such. Thus, they lust after his or her body. So here, when we think about another being, if we feel some kind of attachment towards them, it's usually out of seeing that as something pleasurable, something desirable. But in order to get rid of that kind of feeling, we don't see the ways in which they are impure or unclean. And so in order to eliminate that kind of desire, reverse that desire, is based upon seeing the uncleanliness of that. So if one is an ordained male who feels lust for female bodies, then thinking about the female body in this way removes that kind of attachment. And if you are an ordained female who lusts after men's bodies, thinking about men's bodies in this way gets rid of that kind of attachment.
Oh yeah. 다 차고 미르베 류레 차고 미르베 빼셔도 빼가셔도 쓰네. 미신가 시미자 미시방가 시소라 미자베 봄바 페나 네제레지 봄바체 티나는 미자야 강샤요나 실로데 장마체체 치 겐제라부터다 타라부터 겹치 샤샤요나 시요라 티 미자 네임바하 공개체나 코티치라 소반쟁그리 마도 장마쟁기 마르와 텔레 착바키 마르와 디나시 티 착바키 메릭베 빼샤기도 미시 강시세 미시바 강시 미자베 봄바견라 차 봄바체 나로레 미자 루샹게지나 텔리아네 칠로네 바 장마라스 겐 겐다부터 테샤나 텔레 착바타르시고라 강가라주 류라 소바테조 칠로 겐자드 메토타야레 소바치 겐자담르타야라 겐데타바이나 나로리아 미상에 강대 연에 텔레 착바키 마르바스로 봄바테시네 네체르시나 티나시 지템바데서가 미시베와게 케바이나 페메르다 페메이나 케벨르리아 rabjungla sobaate zo chakba kyuritiina ten doguyo ten doye tandalya tineshi chakba rigi marese nang chakma dan chi wangbu ko chakma de misawa jonggon ti shachi re dewa tinde samtangu rese da ya tinde wile kene.
So then next comes an example to illustrate this. Here it says in 151, like unknowing persons who have become attached to an ornamented vessel filled with filth, ignorant and confused worldly beings are attached to women or men. So here, like this example, if you have some kind of a vessel, and either sort of inside the vessel or the vessel itself is something really putrid, disgusting, unclean, but yet you've ornamented it with all sorts of beautiful things on the outside. If you know that the contents, the kind of internal vessel itself is something quite unclean, quite gross, even though it is ornamented and adorned with all kinds of various things, you recognize it as being unclean. You don't feel a kind of attachment to that. So too, when it comes to others' bodies, out of not knowing, unknowing, they become attached to these bodies, which might be ornamented with various beautiful things, but really are in the nature of containing contents that are quite unclean. So it's not right. It's not logical to have that sort of attachment to something that is, in essence, unclean. So therefore, one should see the body of a woman as or a man as being like that.
Oh yeah. Tandere. Takebada pemegi lule chakbayina. Ani chakde drachumbe kombarab tende topkuyo na. Ani shenda neda lonjola soba chakba mebese. Pemela soba tende li shenja do metoba tende yina. O te tene lule soba tezu tanda kondo sheba na shi. Chakba mirigbe na ne redi ora. Mitame ranshinji chakba mirigbe ne tele chakdebe na. Ani chakde drachumbe yurtugu marese. O di shegi ora. No. Pemegi lule tabude. Shenjan dogbe shingone rede yode. Telia kibada peme penzu chakbada tende ina. Ani te chakde drachumba yurega shiyo mares. Drachumba yola tangmala ne lu longjola soba tangmala shenja tegura. O titandal shigura. Tene karsido sena. Luji ko irwa. Tatali shebana shi nangda chi changmane mitangwan zakbala soba o tende gen jungsage mitangwan changman jungsage be nelu be shi zora de resora. Tela pa chache debe ani chakde drachumba yuregi ani shiyo marese. Tisonda dele chakba rigi marese. O tisongudo kebada pembe kanyine ti luli chakba rigi marese. Ya te chilana.
So, then next, it basically says, how could one become an arhat or get to this state without attachment if one has a kind of attachment to women's bodies or to men's bodies? So, here in verse 152, it reads, if the world is greatly attached to the putrid objects that are bodies, which should cause non-attachment, how then can it be led to non-attachment? So here it is something, the body, as it is filled with all of these unclean things, actually inside and outside, both unclean, is really not the basis for attachment. And if one wants to attain the state of an arhat, well, a state without attachment, wherein one needs to give up attachment to all kinds of things, then why is it the case, like, how is it the case that one could proceed to such a state so long as you are still attached to something like the body of another? So, here, whether it is the body of a man or a woman, so long as you remain sort of clinging, attached to that, how could one possibly attain the state of an arhat, get to a point wherein you are beyond such attachment?
Oh yeah. Tandi shiba de ma de chi shigdwa. Chidan ko keba pime kare lu na mezang shi imbalia. Chakbe shi ma imba chilia ne. Lumbu tsugu samlo korma tu ne chakba tagi yores ti shigdwa. Mo ti shigara. Chidar shangda chi shi la se. Shangji la soba tezo sangma mezang wa nga zu chilo liba chini te soba chigira. Tin jungsa ki zoga dabde sosu lu ne junggi wara. 저 상다 지와라 소바 중에 시리에서 오라 연주 내가래 연주 팔아 잡아다 집에는 박바다 같은데 내게 배쪽보다 지른교도 정말 이제 저도 박바도 차기라 그거랑 뢰파 따네 지차기를 작배 시승 알아서 따나도 말인데 이나 그 뢰파 따시 작배 시도가라 박바도 쓰기라 연주 팔아 잡아다 쪽바 사타 지마요 저 쪽바 요새들 같이라 잡아 따르세 대신 상당 지시라 이제 상지 중에 시 상지도 미다어를 찍으라 당매 질로잖아 나로는 중국들을 들게 미다어지 요새가 시리 들을 내가 잡아리 말해서 대차 로 대차 연주 가르도 소스나 대차 연주 파남샤서 어디래 결에 박바남도 저도 대단 라와를 착바리 말해서 rabjung pomola soba ina da tele chakba chakte che kongege tashun be debu tom de batende ne tele chakba ring mare se te she do ya tende so
So then it sort of gives an example of how those who are sort of stupid or unwise are have a liking for these things that are really the cause of that which is unclean. So here it reads then in 153, just as filth-loving pigs are greatly attached to heaps of feces and urine, so too are filth-loving pigs that are desirous people greatly attached to heaps of feces and urine. So things like feces and urine, we all see as being unclean once they are out of the body, right? But yet it is strange that we don't see the body from which they come as being unclean. Now, pigs have a particular way of viewing things where they might look at something like feces and urine as being somehow clean. They impute that as something desirable and roll around in it. But yet we who are ignorant, although we see like feces and urine, if they are outside of the body, as being something unclean, we still feel a kind of attachment toward the bodies from which they come. So we are sort of like these kind of ignorant or filth-loving pigs ourselves, in that desirous people are greatly attached to the heaps of, as in the sources of feces and urine.
oh yeah then it is so what did this also no
So our time is up for today, so we will stop there, leaving it then at verse 153 or just after.
oh yeah
Thank you, Ginla.
Nagarjuna.
Thank you very much
Yeah.
for your practical teachings.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
And Katrina, thank you so much for your beautiful translation. Very clear. We'll see everyone next Monday at 8 a.m. Pacific. So we'll finish with some dedications.
May the spiritual teachers lead me on the sacred path, and the spiritual friends who practice it have long life. May I pacify completely all outer and inner hindrances. Grant such inspiration, I pray. May the lives of the venerable spiritual mentors be stable, and their virtuous actions spread in the 10 directions. May the light of Lobsang's teachings dispelling the darkness of the beings in the three worlds always increase. Iram Guru Ramana Dayami. Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state, Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their sufferings. May the precious Bodhi mind not yet born arise and grow. May the born have no decline, but increase forevermore.
Dinda